There's a moment from May 1981 that television executives still study today. Johnny Carson, the man who spent 3 decades building an impenetrable wall of professionalism, completely broke down and cried on camera in front of millions. The man who could save any dying joke sat there with tears streaming down his face while an elderly actor read a poem about his dead dog. That moment was a window into the real Johnny Carson, the one behind the perfectly timed laughs. And it happened because of one guest who had the power to make Johnny drop every defense. But that actor wasn't the only one. Over 30 years and thousands of interviews, there were exactly 10 people who consistently made Johnny forget he was performing. Today we're talking about all 10 of them and what it really took to earn Carson's genuine affection in an industry built on fake smiles. Jimmy Stewart made Johnny cry, and that tells you everything. Stewart was genuinely decent, humble, and authentic in ways that seemed impossible for someone 50 years in Hollywood. He didn't come with polished anecdotes. He would pause mid-sentence, search for words in that distinctive halting way, and just be real. Johnny adored that. That night in May, Stewart came to talk about his recently deceased dog, Bo. When Stewart pulled out a folded piece of paper, Johnny had no idea what was coming. Stewart read in that unmistakable voice about how Bo used to sleep on the bed, about morning walks and unconditional love, about coming home to an empty house. Halfway through, Johnny's eyes glistened. By the end, tears ran down his face on national television, and he made no attempt to hide them. That moment became one of the most replayed clips because it was real in a way television almost never allowed. Johnny trusted Stewart so deeply that he instructed staff to extend his segments and move commercial breaks. Most guests got 7 minutes, but Stewart got however long he needed. Before his final broadcast in 1992, Johnny personally called Stewart to thank him for 30 years of friendship. Bob Newhart shared Johnny's exact comedic sensibility. They both understood dry humor, flawless timing, and delivery that trusted the audience to get it. Their conversations felt like jazz performances. Newhart would start a story and Johnny would land the perfect interjection. Then they'd go back and forth with timing that looked effortless but required enormous skill. One memorable moment was Newhart's routine about Germans and their literal approach to American humor, explaining why they couldn't understand calling a bald man curly or a 350-pound man tiny. Johnny was doubled over laughing, though the segment sparked controversy. Johnny defended Newhart publicly, calling it obvious satire. That loyalty mattered. What really set Newhart apart was his complete lack of ego and genuine gratitude. Even after becoming a massive star, he always thanked Johnny and was kind to every crew member. Carson despised prima donnas, and Newhart was the opposite. Eventually they became real friends outside the show, which was extraordinarily rare. Johnny played golf with Newhart regularly, and they had dinner at each other's homes. That level of friendship only happened maybe 5 times in Johnny's entire run. Don Rickles was the only insult comic Johnny trusted to attack him without limits. Their chemistry worked because Carson understood what Rickles was doing, and Rickles knew where the line was. This mattered because Johnny was famously sensitive about disrespect, but Rickles was the absolute exception. He could insult Johnny's golf game, marriages, hair, monologues, everything, and Carson never took offense. The legendary cigarette box incident sealed their bond forever. Rickles accidentally broke Carson's cherished box while guest hosting, so Johnny marched onto the set of CPO Sharkey mid-taping and confronted him on camera. Johnny only did that because he knew Rickles would turn it into comedy gold. Rickles looked terrified and delighted simultaneously. What made it special was that Rickles respected Carson's power but never worshipped him. He treated Johnny like a regular guy, and Johnny loved that more than any flattery. Burt Reynolds understood that talk shows were performances, not press junkets. You came to entertain, not just plug movies. Reynolds brought genuine spontaneity to every appearance. The most famous moment was when he smashed shaving cream into Carson's face mid-interview with no warning. Johnny's jaw dropped, the audience gasped, then erupted. Johnny loved it, because Reynolds was one of the few who could truly surprise him. Reynolds had zero ego about being the butt of jokes. He would show up in ridiculous costumes or bring props that caught Johnny off guard. Sometimes he'd change direction mid-interview just to see how Johnny would react. You could see Johnny's body language shift when Reynolds walked through the curtain. This wasn't going to be boring movie promotion. Johnny used Reynolds as an example when coaching younger actors. Forget your talking points, come ready to play, be yourself, trust the moment. Rodney Dangerfield delivered guaranteed laughs every appearance with machine gun one-liners. Carson knew Rodney would crush and could lift a slow show. Johnny admired consistency, and Rodney hit his mark every time. But beyond the jokes, Rodney's I get no respect persona brought out a different side of Carson. It let Johnny play the supportive straight man. He loved feeding Rodney set-up lines and watching him spin them into punchlines. There was real vulnerability underneath Rodney's act that Johnny responded to. You could see it in how Johnny would lean in during stories or laugh harder to give him momentum. Carson took care of guests he loved, and Rodney was in that category. Carol Burnett brought warmth that made Johnny's body language soften the second she appeared. With most guests, Carson maintained professional distance, but with Carol he relaxed completely. She could improvise or even jokingly interview Johnny himself. Burnett treated everyone kindly, from pages to makeup artists. Johnny believed you could judge character by how people treated those who couldn't advance their career, and Carol passed that test every time. She remembered crew members' names months later. Carson extended her segments, breaking his strict timing rules, and would bump scheduled guests so she could finish stories. Staff said Johnny referenced Carol as the ideal guest when training producers. She had everything he valued: talent, warmth, professionalism, spontaneity, kindness. Their friendship was visible on camera, with inside jokes and references to private conversations, which Johnny almost never did. James Garner was everything Johnny thought a movie star should be: authentic, unpretentious, allergic to Hollywood ego. Garner told stories like a regular guy at the bar, never glorifying himself, even discussing major films or legends like Steve McQueen. He talked about screw-ups, forgotten lines, disagreements with directors, real stuff most actors edited out. Johnny loved that honesty. Garner treated every crew member with the same respect he gave Carson, chatting with camera operators during breaks and remembering their names months later. Carson felt genuinely comfortable with Garner in ways he didn't with most actors. He'd reference off-camera conversations during interviews, a sign of real trust. With some guests, everything was performance. With Garner, Johnny acted like he was talking to an actual longtime friend who happened to be famous. George Burns embodied everything Johnny strived for: longevity, discipline, timeless craft. Johnny actually got nervous before Burns appeared, which almost never happened. Carson controlled that set with precision, but with Burns he became a student. Burns kept getting funnier with age, peaking at 70 and staying sharp for 2 more decades. Johnny deferred to Burns more than anyone, sometimes going minutes without interrupting. He wanted to hear about vaudeville early comedy surviving 70 years in entertainment. During commercial breaks, Carson stayed engaged instead of checking notes, leaning in to soak up stories like a private masterclass. When Burns talked, Johnny really listened. Lucille Ball was one of the few guests Johnny called royalty. Their respect came from both understanding the pressure of running a weekly television institution. Lucy had done it with I Love Lucy, Johnny with The Tonight Show. They spoke the same language about the grind. Johnny gave her the best camera angles, more airtime, complete control. During one appearance, he surprised her with her decades-old screen test from before fame. Lucy cried on camera. Johnny had spent real time thinking about what would move her instead of just booking for ratings. He admired her intelligence and business acumen. Lucy was television's first female studio head, building an empire in a male-dominated industry. Johnny respected that power, especially earned in an era that made nothing easy for women. Orson Welles activated Johnny's intellectual side. When Welles appeared, topics shifted to history, literature, politics, classical music, magic, things Johnny cared about but rarely discussed. Carson actually studied before Welles came on, spending hours reading to keep pace with his enormous knowledge. That was unprecedented because Johnny didn't do homework for guests. Welles performed elaborate magic tricks that delighted Johnny, a lifelong enthusiast. But what Johnny loved most was Welles's brutal honesty about failures. No Hollywood spin. Wells talked candidly about bombed movies, collapsed projects, terrible creative decisions. That candor was rare among stars who only discussed successes. Johnny told friends that conversations with Orson were some of the most intellectually satisfying of his career. These 10 shared something crucial. They made Johnny Carson feel like a real person instead of an institution. They brought out authentic sides he usually kept hidden. Stewart made him vulnerable. Newhart made him feel understood. Reynolds made him playful. Rickles made him laugh like a civilian. Rodney made him supportive. Carroll made him warm. Garner made him comfortable. Burns made him humble. Lucy made him respectful. Wells made him intellectually engaged. That was the real test. Could you make him drop the host mask and be himself? Most guests couldn't. These 10 could every time. Who do you think was Johnny's absolute favorite? Which guest would you have wanted to see but never got the chance? These stories matter because they show what television used to be when it was real.